Hello YouTube and welcome to my channel, Jade Rhapsody. Today I have another jewelry tutorial for you, and I'm going to start by telling you the tools that we're going to need. We're going to need our chain nose pliers, or some people call them needle nose pliers, a pair of snips, flat nose pliers, and a pair of crimping pliers. And you can see that the crimping pliers have two different settings in them. Now our materials we're going to use, we're also going to need a measuring tape to measure our wire. We're going to be using 8 silver beads. We're going to be using 2 of these faceted oval round red beads and 6 smaller. These are the Swarovski AB. I think they're about 4mm bicone crystals. We need a clasp. We need a pendant of some sort. I have this one ready to go. I've already added 2 jump rings to this pendant. And we're going to need about 32 crimp beads. I do prefer using the smaller ones rather than the bigger ones on a project like this. And I am using the 19 strand Bead satin silver wire. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is measure our wire, and I'm going to measure off about 18 inches using my measuring tape here. I'm going to use my snips to snip that at the 18-inch mark, and then we're done with that, and we're done with our wire, so we'll set that aside. Now what we're going to have to do is find the center of this wire. And you can do that by folding it in half or by measuring. I prefer to fold it in half because I find that more accurate. So I'm going to put on my pendant, the last jump ring. I'm just going to slide that down my wire. And I want that fairly centered. And then we're going to use our 2 larger red beads. We're just going to put one on each side of our pendant. We're going to make sure our ends are even, and we're ready for a crimp bead. We're going to put a crimp bead on both sides of our pendant. I like to get my crimp beads as I go because they're very small and they're very easy to lose. So I'm just going to put 2 of those out. And I'm going to put 1 crimp bead. And they're basically just a tube, a hollow bead. Now I've showed you what we do with our crimping pliers before, but if you haven't seen that tutorial, it might be helpful if you go back and watch it. Or I can show you on these. In our other tutorial we used a crimp bead, and the first thing you did was you'd use the setting closest to the joint here, and this would crimp it, and you'd have a strand on either side, and then you'd use the second setting to re-round it so it'd be up like this, and it'd look more like a bead shape. But today we're not going to have the second side until we get to the end, so you just have to watch that you have the strand on one side whenever you're crimping these. So basically that's the plan here. We do want to keep these even as possible, so I am going to set my flat nose pliers on the ends of this. Actually, I may need something heavier than that, so I'm going to use my cell phone. So you'll just have to ignore that. So some type of weight may be required, or a clamp of some sort to get that straight, or you can just hold it by both ends. We're going to use the setting closest to the joint, as I said previously. We're just going to make sure our string is on either side of that center point. We don't want our strand of wire in the center point. And then we're going to use the second setting to fold that over. We're going to do the same thing on both sides. We want to keep them push together. I've already got one side. I'm checking my ends. My ends are fairly even. I'm gonna go ahead and push that other one up and put it in the first setting, keeping the wire to one side of the center. And then the second setting, I'm just gonna turn it 90 degrees and round that out. So now we're ready to start measuring where we're going to put our beads. I do have an example here on this necklace. I did about every inch. So, and I just drilled the shell on this one and put a jump ring on it. So it's pretty simple. So we're going to use our measuring tape for that, so we can decide where we want to put our next crimp beads. I'm going to go ahead and get 2 more crimp beads out. And this time we're going to use our silver beads. So we have some alternate pattern design. So first we need a crimp bead on both sides. So I'm going to put that on. Then we're going to need our silver bead. And this is a good design to use if you don't have enough beads to fill up the entire wire. So you can kind of show the wire a little bit and show your work a little bit. So I'm going to pull that down and I'm going to go, let's see, let's measure. Those beads are about a little over 1/2 inch. So I want to go from here, I want to go about to 1.5 inches. So that's about right here. And once you crimp one side, so I'm going to do that crimping again. This is all upside down for me too, by the way. So try and get that bead at 1.5. I'm going to hold that crimp bead there. I'm going to crimp it with my first setting and fold it over. Now that's going to prevent this bead from sliding past that point. And I'm going to put one on either side of this bead so it doesn't slide around. Then I'm going to do the same thing with my crimping pliers. I'm going to put the crimp in, and I'm going to turn it 90 degrees and fold it over so it looks like a bead itself. Now that I've got that one done, all I've got to do is hold my ends even. Let's find our ends, let's make them even. Let's find our crimp bead, let's make it even with the other side then. So you can kind of just play it by ear then at this point. You can just line up, once you get one side done, you can just line up the other side with it. And it may be better to just work and focus on one side first rather than focusing on both sides at the same time. It's a little bit more complicated if you focus on both at the same time. So I'm just going to get this silver bead out of the way. I'm going to hold that crimp bead there. I'm going to crimp it. And I'm going to turn it 90 degrees and fold it over. Push that silver bead against it. Get another crimp bead out of my pack here. Put it on the other side of that silver bead. Get as snug up against it as I can. Don't really want a lot of movement in the beads themselves. Crimp it and fold it over. So now you can see we have the start of our necklace with the wire exposed, and I'm just going to continue that pattern, measuring to keep them kind of equal distance apart using my measuring tape. and I'm just gonna finish that out. So I have done one side, and like I said, if you want to do it measuring by the sides, you can go ahead and finish out one side, and then you can put them side by side. And you can scoot your crimp bead to where your bottom crimp bead is on the other side. And we all are alternating between our red beads and our silver beads. So I did that there. And I'm going to measure one side against the other. I want that one about right there. And I'm just going to repeat that process on this side of crimp bead, decorative bead, crimp bead to hold the decorative bead in place. And I'm alternating between the silver and red beads. And then I'll show you how we attach our clasp. Alright, so now you can see I've got all my beads on there, and I actually only used 6 of the silver beads and 6 of the red beads. And I've got a little room here on the end so I can attach my clasp. And if you want this to be 18 inches long, you're going to want to cut your wire a little longer than that, because we will lose a little bit at the ends when we put our clasp on. Now to attach the clasp, I always like to have the hook on the right side because I am right-handed. So I put on one crimp bead, go ahead and put the clasp hoop directly on there, and then you're going to loop your wire around and thread it back through that same crimp bead. And then I did go ahead and cut this, so I don't want to lose all of that, so I'm going to try and hold that in and pull the side that's got the beads on it so that I don't lose that much of my end there. I'm just going to kind of scoot that up towards my clasp. I do want a little, and this is where it's important to have, and this one where we had our wire, basically we're making this loop here. We're going to crimp the wire on either side of where it makes that crimp, and then our clasp would be hanging off of this part, the loop. So it's important that you get your wire on either side. So you want one towards the left and one towards the right of this crimp. And sometimes you have to flip your bead to accomplish that, and then we just crimp it down, fold it over. We'll need our snips. We've got a little bit of excess there that I don't want, so we'll get that, pull the side that we don't want to clip out of the way, and we'll just snip that little bit of excess off. And then we're just going to repeat that process on the other side. First we need our crimp bead. Put our crimp bead on our unfinished end. Put the tag on the other end. It's got a little loop or a little hole in it for that. Put it directly onto the wire. I don't like using jump rings on this wire because the jump rings are unsoldered, and when they're unsoldered there's a slight chance that they can come off that wire. Now loop our wire, put it back through the same bead. It's the exact same process we just did. I want to pull it mostly on the side that has the beads on it, up where there's not much gap between that and the end of the clasp. I'm going to try and keep one side of the wire on either side of the crimp bead. Then we are going to crimp, turn 90 degrees, and bend it over into a tube shape. And we got our clasp. We're ready to pull the side we don't want to clip out of the way and trim off the other side flush. I always like to give it a good yank to make sure it's going to stay. And here is our new necklace using the 19 strand Bead satin silver wire. And we've got alternating between red and silver beads, and we've spaced our beads out where they're even on both sides. And I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. And as I said, I will be trying to shoot more jewelry tutorials throughout the fall season. And please stay tuned for more jewelry tutorials on my station, Jade Rhapsody.